All right, I'm going to call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for January 12th, 2023. It is 10:01 in the morning. And Justin, would you please lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So item C, we are having a special presentation today from or by Hannah Hurdy. Hannah, if you want to come on up and I'll just kind of give a brief intro. When you speak into the microphone, just make sure it's pretty close to you. And I think it's on, it should be on. So Hannah is the American Legion oratorical candidate. And a couple months ago, I had the privilege of judging the contest for the American Legion, along with several others. And she did a fantastic job. You did two speeches, right? There was a longer one and then a shorter one. And one of them was on constitutional principles. And you talked a little bit about how on college campuses, that's kind of being eroded in some ways, which was really interesting to hear. But I thought it would be great to have Hannah on so she could practice her skills because you have to go on again and compete again. So I invited her on for about 5 minutes. If you have something you want to talk about for 5 minutes related to the Constitution, I think it would be a great, good reminder for us too in the oath that we took. So take it away.
Will you be able to hear me if I stand or shall I?
I'm not sure. Would that work?
I'll just
Okay.
try sitting.
Okay.
Okay. All right. The second president of the US, John Adams, once said, "Posterity, you will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you'll make good use of it," unquote. We are the posterity mentioned here. You see, the American Constitution began as a set of values that were then set into law. The American Constitution was founded, in short, on the values of liberty and limited government. In order to make good use of our freedom, we have to use it to preserve the core values of our nation. And so we have to ask ourselves, do most Americans really still hold the values outlined in the Constitution? Unfortunately, it appears that many do not. Among our protected freedoms is the freedom of speech, a freedom which is absolutely essential to protecting the entire Constitution and the values that inspired its creation. Because how do we expect to pass down the core values of our Constitution from generation to generation if we can't even speak of them? In a 2022 survey, nearly 45,000 students from 208 different colleges were surveyed on their perspectives on free speech on campus. Now, before I read these statistics, I'd like to point out that my goal here is not to take a stance on any of these specific issues, but rather to point out that in all of the examples to follow, 60 to 74% of students thought it best to not even hear from an individual who held beliefs counter to theirs. The survey reported that, quote, 74% of students do not support allowing a campus speaker who says that transgender people have a mental disorder or one who says Black Lives Matter is a hate group. 69% do not support allowing one who says the 2020 election was stolen. And 60% do not support allowing one who says abortion should be completely illegal, unquote. The current culture, at least on college campuses, is in favor of literally banning the exchange of ideas. Historically, the college has been a place where ideas are discussed and challenged, and individuals are encouraged to think critically about them. These are all topics that should be freely discussed on college campuses so that students can make educated decisions about their beliefs. But more than banning the discussion of some of these ideas, some believe it's acceptable to take matters into their own hands to prevent a speaker from speaking. In a separate 2021 study, it was reported that, quote, 2/3 of students, or 66%, say it is acceptable to shout down a speaker to prevent them from speaking on campus. And nearly 1 in 4, or 23%, say it is acceptable to use violence to stop campus speech, unquote. This type of blatant rejection of the principle of free speech has led individuals to stay quiet about their beliefs. In the same survey, it reported that, quote, more than 80% of students report censoring their viewpoints on campus at least some of the time, with 21% saying they censor themselves often, unquote. This affects more than just the frustrated college student that wants to say what they want when they want. This affects our entire culture, both presently and in the future. Because when we regulate what we and others can speak and teach, we regulate what future generations can learn. By regulating free speech, we allow the core values of our nation to be decided. Therefore, it is the duty of each citizen to know and speak about our Constitution's importance and purpose. Stop self-censorship and continue to speak when they try to stop you. And I understand that this is asking a lot, but while freedom is difficult to preserve, it is even more difficult to get back once it is lost. Because just as a muscle becomes weak and slowly deteriorates if not exercised, so do our rights. And while the right to free speech was not defined in the Constitution and is left up to interpretation by the courts, the purpose for it remains clear. That the American people would remain free to discuss their beliefs and concerns about their government, their country, and their culture. I'm going to leave you with a story of an encounter that I had that reminded me all the more why I wrote this speech. Recently, when I went to go buy some overpriced bean juice and milk, or as most would call it, coffee, the employee at the coffee stand asked me what I was up to that day. And I told her I was going to go home and write a speech for a scholarship competition that I was in. And so naturally, she asked me what the speech was about, and I told her simply the Constitution. Those were the only words that I said. And she responded with, "Oh, that sounds like a really controversial topic." But these are the values, the very idea of speaking of our founding document was controversial in her mind. But these are the values that we should be speaking and conversing about regularly. These are the values that we are responsible for passing down from generation to generation. These are the values that allow for our freedom and prosperity and the values that were paid for with American blood. So make good use of your freedom, speak up, and never be silenced.
Great, thank you. Very well done.
Thank you.
Thank
Can I
you.
get a couple pictures if that's okay?
Yeah.
Before you take off?
Very well done.
Thank you.
Very encouraging. Thank you.
Commissioners, you want to get a picture maybe in the front? Okay. Thank you. Interesting times you guys. That was very impressive. I think she does a better job than most
Yeah, that was-
politicians do.
that was good.
Thank
She'll
you
go
for
far.
bringing her to us. That was very encouraging.
Okay, so that brings us to our item D, which is our calendar session. Anything to add before we go over work session calendar discussion?
I think we have everything
No.
for this weekend.
I think we do too. Okay, so work session calendar, Ken, was that an add-on from you?
Yes,
Okay.
typically, in this one, we don't necessarily have to go into a lengthy discussion. There is one calendar item that I did want to bring forward, but typically each year we talk about putting together some work session calendars if there's particular items that the board wants to get on the schedule for a work session down the road. And so I just wanted to float the idea out there that if you have particular topics that you know that you would like to get scheduled and get on the calendar for work sessions, you can, if you want to email me and I'll put together that list, then we can come back together with an actual calendar in front of us and kind of figure out where we're going to schedule those. And so that's just the general, I just wanted to put it on the board's radar. The second part is Oregon Department of Forestry reached out. It's been quite some time. You Mary, you may remember in 2018, the last time we had a forest classification. So the ODF would like to attend on the next week on the 19th and give a presentation. I was going to go ahead and schedule that as a work session if it's okay with the board. So that way you can hear a presentation, get an update. I also have some materials that they prepared and sent to me that I'll also share with the board later this afternoon. So that way you have some background on what the discussion is going to look like and what the request is going to look like as
Yeah.
far as next steps.
Okay, sounds great. Anything to add? Okay. Item E is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. So if there's anyone in the audience who has public comment, please come forward. If you're in the virtual audience, please raise your hand. Okay, hearing none. We will move on to item F, which is our department update, and we are being joined today by our planning director, Ken Friday. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Just wanted to give an update on 3 items that's before the planning department. First, and Kit was not here when I sent this, so I wanted to kind of give this as an update for him. At the November 10th board hearing, the board voted to send the proposed road ordinance amendments back to the planning commission. And these code amendments were requested by ODOT to allow improvements to the bypass interchange at Highway 219. The bypass project is called Phase 2A and was to move forward in April of 2023. Excuse me. After the board's action, Dave Hageberg met with me to discuss concerns about meeting that April deadline. He requested that I issue an interpretation confirming that the roads in Phase 2A were already approved by virtue of the 6 bypass interchange ordinances that were previously adopted. I agreed with his assessment, and after consulting with both ODOT and our legal counsel, I decided that this would be an appropriate action. And I subsequently issued my interpretation on December 14th and sent notice to the newspaper and to property owners in the surrounding interchange area. And give them an opportunity to appeal that. I notified the board a few days prior to issuing my interpretation to ensure that the board was also aware of what I was doing and made sure that there were at least 2 board hearings held during the notice period so this action could be called up if you desired that. My issuance of the interpretation only affects roads located within the bypass interchange overlay zones, does not affect the language in any of our zoning codes. I saw this as the most surgical and precise method for resolving the bypass issue, and that one that would take the urgency out of any of the code amendments. December 29th last year was the last day to appeal, and fortunately no appeal was filed. I wanted the board to know there was no longer an urgency to adopt code changes for this interchange project, and just to be here to answer any questions you have about that.
So I think it was last Friday, I had met with Ken and Christian after the planning meeting because there was a lot of confusion around that. I think commissioners didn't realize that by issuing the interpretation that it did take the urgency away, and that was kind of a legally strong document or what have you to and be sufficient to alter those underlying zones to allow for the bypass.
Yeah, it's only for that interchange though, and in the bypass interchange overlay zone. So it's not affecting other properties or other zones in the county.
Right. And so my question was, what part of the overlay district do you see as your sort of justification? What's the strength behind the interpretation?
It's the 6 ordinances that were adopted. In reviewing those, there was ample notice given within those interchange overlay areas that the bypass is going in here, and we're also going to be doing roads to support that bypass, and that's what this interchange improvement project is. It's just a provide improvements within that interchange area. And while it talks about the underlying zones, it also talks about that, you know, these roads are going to be going in this area. That's had notice. And because I was making an interpretation, I needed to provide notice to make sure that if anyone had any objections, they had an opportunity to appeal that to the Board of Commissioners.
Okay. So for all intents and purposes, that the ODOT issue is put to bed.
Correct.
They're no longer concerned.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was kind of the first directive we had to planning. The second was more of the less urgent general, you know, go through each zone and sort of justify why we think roads need to be included and
Right.
whatever.
Yes.
So I saw a lot of frustration after the planning meeting was it last week?
It was last
last
week.
week.
Yes.
Because folks weren't really aware that the urgency was removed from the bypass issue. So we had, you know, 7 or 8 people in the room that came to testify and were sent home. And we heard about that. So I just want to make sure going forward that the communication is a bit more clear on that, because
I did send that interpretation to the attorney representing what I thought were the 7 or 8 people, but I didn't send it to any citizen in particular, other than the Planning Commission and the attorney that was working on that issue. But I see the Planning Commission still working on the answers to the questions that the board provided to them. So.
okay. Okay, well, it's good to clarify that at least the ODOT issue, the urgent issue is off the table and satisfied. Commissioners, any questions on that?
I do. I just want clarification on one thing if I can.
Sure.
There was no appeals once you sent out the notice. There was none, correct? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't even get a phone call. I thought I'd at least get some phone
Mhm.
calls about
Okay.
it. But
Well, I think the issue really, a lot of it has to do with folks came thinking that they were going to have an opportunity to weigh in, and then when you have something sort of removed from the agenda in that way, it's frustrating. I mean, we've seen it happen here where folks make the commitment to come to something and then are told, no, we don't need you to weigh in today.
yeah, and I knew there was a possibility, and I sent that possibility to Wendy Kellington, the attorney. I didn't know that was going to be decided right off the bat, and I was looking, you know, towards Dan and kind of bracing myself for whether there was going to be an objection, and Wendy did not object. And so that surprised me, and I thought, okay, well. You know,
Well, I was online. I was trying to object
And
and I couldn't, so.
I did not see your hand up. I was told later that Desiree did see your hand up. I apologize. I did not see your hand raised. I was looking right at Dan, kind of going, really? You know, I just didn't know he was going to do it right then. But I think he was trying to do it right then because he was trying to be polite. He was trying to let them know that this might be a long hearing and he didn't want them to sit through it. And I think, you know, there was a lot of testimony submitted right at the last minute. And I think Dan wanted to make sure that the Planning Commission members had time to look at that testimony. That's some of the concerns that he expressed to me.
Okay. Yeah, I think there was just, for me, from my point of view, it was an urgent matter and really a directive from the board to the point where, you know, I was on ready to answer any questions.
And I was
make
very glad you
sure-
were there because I don't like speaking for the board, and I'd rather have the board answer questions that are board related. So.
Yeah, but somehow Dan didn't get the message that this was a priority. In fact, it probably should have been dealt with over anything else on the agenda. So I think we just need to maybe meet with him and just work a little bit on that
Okay.
communication. Okay, any further questions on that issue?
No.
Okay,
The next issue I have is psilocybin. As you may have noted, the state filed a notice of intent to appeal our ordinance because they don't view service centers as a standalone use. I find this very frustrating for a couple of reasons. First, DLCD did not come up with any model code or model time, place, and manner requirements to give to the local jurisdictions. They just kind of left it up to us to figure it out. Second, when they did provide a suggestion, they had two suggestions, but both appeared to come with their own problems. The first was to adopt a service center as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. And the problem is that the measure states that you're not supposed to treat these as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use, the service centers. The second suggestion was to allow service centers as a home occupation. The problem is that the service center cannot be located inside a primary residence per ORS 475.222 or 2208. Lastly, they don't seem to view a service center as a standalone permitted use, and yet it looks to me like that's exactly what the measure treats it as. The measure says that we're to treat mushroom crops as a farm crop, and states that the operation of a psilocybin service center may be carried on in conjunction with a psilocybin producing fungi crop. The LCDC will be considering their appeal at the January 26th hearing to see whether or not they're going to be going forward. They are asking for comments 5 days prior to that time. I would suggest that the board send a letter objecting to this appeal and perhaps something that Jody and I could maybe write it up and present next week.
Okay. And this is a pretty unprecedented thing? Or it's just because it's so new?
It occasionally happens, but it's been, I can't remember the last time this has happened where we've had the state saying that they were going to appeal. So
Interesting.
So in the past, the board has sent in a letter to DLCD.
Yeah, I think there was one time on one issue that the board actually attended a hearing, but I'm trying to remember what it was, and I have not been able to recall what the issue was. It was like 20 plus years ago. So you can attend the hearing if you wish to, either virtually or in person. But at least I'd like to have us on record as objecting. And there are citizens that have asked me if they can object. It appears you can't. They can't. There's not going to be public testimony on this, but the board is invited to provide any sort of input.
Okay, so you'll craft a letter with council. Oh, okay.
What does that mean? Have we had any applicants, and what does that mean for their?
We actually have had I've signed off on one grow permit, but I think that's not affected by this. And we actually have had one application submitted, and I'll probably have to write a letter stating that the application is incomplete until we can get this resolved.
Okay.
Is there any other counties that are in the same boat as we are with this?
I'll check. I haven't heard, but I can post that on to the planning director's email and to see if anyone else is. I know there were others that were in the same boat of placing this in their code and trying to meet the timeline. But I'm not aware of any other appeals, but I'll see what I can find.
The other thing that'd be kind of handy going forward, because I don't think this is going away, is how the cities are sitting far as whether they put a 2-year moratorium on or they outright approved it, just kind of in our area, because I think that'll help us make a decision on where we're going to head with this.
I do have that. I'll send that to you.
Okay.
Yeah. The last item I have relates to accessory dwelling units. A couple of years ago, the legislature passed Senate Bill 391, which would allow accessory dwelling units in our rural residential zones. It's my belief that this housing is housing that we need because we get constant requests for it. We put forward an ordinance, and then we're informed that we needed to wait for the wildfire mapping that's required by a different Senate bill. I think it's Senate Bill 762. You're probably aware the state has run into intense opposition to the wildfire mapping. And it's unknown as to when that will be resolved. My understanding is there's going to be a bill or bills to decouple the wildfire mapping with accessory dwelling units. And if that occurs, I'll bring that back to the board and see if the board wants to write a letter in support of that bill. And yesterday when I met with Commissioner Johnson, he asked me about the number of lots in the rural residential zones. And this morning I was told we have 4,706 rural residential tax lots. And that ends my briefing.
I think they did talk about that bill at AOC.
They did.
It will be coming,
Yep.
so.
Yeah, it sounded like it was a fairly high priority.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Friday?
No, thank
Okay,
you.
thanks, Ken. Appreciate it.
Ken?
And if I may, Chair, before we move on to the next agenda item, I think it's come to our attention. There's something that was supposed to be scheduled on the agenda for today that it appears it was missed. It didn't make it on this agenda, but it sounds like notices were sent out that we were supposed to have a second.
So it's just the public hearing for a public nuisance. So if you remember, I think you were here, on December 1st, the board, and this is the process set out in our, solid waste code. The board has to accept, information from, in this case, Mike Kemper, regarding property that is potentially a public nuisance. If the board finds that there's probable cause that there is a public nuisance, which they did, they ordered a notice be sent and a public hearing be set. And this was, I don't remember the board order number off the top of my head, but there was a board order that said the hearing for today, notice was sent out, and I do believe that the property owner is here today. So if we can, it'd be good to get this added to the agenda. It just got missed on the agenda.
It appears that the only thing that was missed was adding it to the agenda. And under the public meetings laws, we can consider subjects that don't appear on the agenda. And I would have no problem if the board is okay moving it forward, given the fact that we did, as I understand, comply with all of the required notice around this matter to the public and to the individuals involved.
Okay, do we have the materials for that handy?
That I don't
I
know.
believe Mike Kemper will have some documents to provide you
Yeah,
with.
okay.
I can also try to email around the memo that was originally sent out in December, which sort of lays out everything.
Okay.
The probable cause document, if you will.
I remember the case. Can you forward that again? real quick?
Yes, I'm having issues with my email, but if I can't, Christian will send it to you guys.
Okay, so at this point, all we're looking at doing is making an amendment to the current agenda to add this after there's already a hearing
Mhm.
on the schedule, so this would be a second item under the hearing agenda, public hearings agenda.
Okay. That sounds good. And then when we get there, I'll just maybe have you introduce the hearing with the language that's appropriate.
Yeah, and apologize again
Okay.
for not getting that on the agenda, and we'll circulate the materials.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so item G, work session. We have nothing on our work session today. Item H is our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. And I just want to thank the Parkway Committee members for their service. It's been a long haul. Okay, item I is old business. Item I1 is consideration of approval of a sealed bid in the amount of $15,250 for tax lots number R 5926004000. This was continued from last week, January 5th, 2023. And if memory serves, we were looking for two things. One was whether or not the lot is buildable, and the other was some clarification on who was notified or potentially further notification is what you were
And
requesting.
And access.
And access. So do we have an update on the lot? I know we received a letter.
want me to go?
Sure.
I actually did invite the bidder's attorney here so that she could answer questions. So she might be a good one to talk about the property itself. If the board wants, board certainly doesn't have to unless they want to.
Well, before we get to the letter,
Yes.
so those basic questions that the commissioners had, have those been answered?
Remind me what those were.
Whether or not the lot is buildable?
Um,
I have a little insight. Yep.
Okay.
So I did a little bit of homework on it. So when I met with Ken yesterday, they followed up, sent me an email. There was only one permit pulled out on that address and it was for temporary power service. There was no other permits pulled. I did go out there, met with Dennis, and he was nice enough to show me around because the access is through two different neighbors' properties, and then Dennis's property has access directly to the Yamhill County property. Showed me around, and it definitely is temporary power service sitting there, which is cut off now. There is no power going to it because PG rerouted the poles up Dennis's driveway instead of more of a direct path to that Yamhill County property. So-
Dennis being the bidder and
yes.
the adjacent property owner.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yes.
Far as access, there is some paperwork that I found that there could possibly be access to this property, an easement through the Don Seats property, which is kind of wraps the Yamhill County property. Visually, you can't see. Jason with the survey department kind of drew on a map where this potential easement could be. And when you visually look at it, there's no road. You have a couple creeks coming down through the property. The only road with culvert on it would be on the neighbor's property to get to this property. There's none where this potential easement is to get to this property. If you wanted to, you'd have to put in culverts, go across the stream, build a road to get to the property. So easements rough, and it's not, from what Ken sent me, it's most likely not buildable.
And the other thing was a concern about making sure that notification was to all of the
That I do not know.
property owners, but we hear that they were not interested. The notification that came back to us.
and Noelle's actually the one who reached out, but, and I believe you talked to Don.
I
who's
talked to
the
Don. Don
property
is
owner.
for sure not interested.
So I think there's one additional property owner, and whether or not Noelle was able to get in touch with them, I am not sure.
That was the second contact with them. They'd already
Right.
received
They'd already
previous
received-
written
yes,
notice.
They have.
So
So it's sort of
the
like
only,
a-
I guess the only open question is whether there'd been any subsequent notice after last week to the one additional property owner. So it
Yes.
doesn't sound like we've made contact for the second time with that owner.
okay.
But that was that Portland address that came back and the understanding was that they weren't interested. It was a different
LNC
company?
tree,
Yeah.
LNC tree, that's all I know.
Okay,
So because there's no prior permit pulled, we're pretty confident it's not.
There would need to be an application
Yeah.
made in order for it to be buildable, and I cannot say it right at this present time that it's buildable. And,
Okay.
The application that would not be.
I can't say at this time, based on the evidence I have, that it's buildable. There would need to be an application made either for a forest template dwelling, which I don't know if it would qualify for, or for a trying to demonstrate that a house had been there and that it formerly had intact wall and roof structure, indoor plumbing, and a heating system, which can be as simple as a wood stove. My understanding, what I've been told, is there was no indoor plumbing on it. And so I don't believe it would pass that. But again, I haven't been on the property. I've seen photos of it. So at this point, I cannot say it's a buildable lot.
thank you.
Okay.
So commissioners, I would just remind the board again, we've done some additional research into this property beyond what we would typically done historically. But the way the board has handled properties like this in the past is If they've accepted bids and agreed to a sale, it's been with a quitclaim deed. And in the quitclaim deed, the county makes no representations and warranties about the title or the conditions on the property. It's the expectation of the bidder and the potential purchaser to go out and do their own due diligence to determine exactly the kinds of questions that we've been talking about today. Is there, isn't there legal access? And is the lot buildable or not? So those sorts of disclaimers and qualifications would still appear on any, my understanding is, unless the board gives us different direction, that would be the process we would follow with this property as well.
Christian, to your point about typically the due diligence that the board does,
Mhm.
this definitely goes above and beyond that. And I appreciate Commissioner Johnston, his diligence in really ferreting out any possibilities that this is something that would have access and would be buildable and all of that. And Commissioner Bershauer for bringing this forward, because when you look at the dollar amount and when you look at what, you know, in terms of housing and people needing to purchase lots to build, this was one of those outliers. But looking at the details, lots of impediments and nothing certainly that makes it look like it would be an easy lot to sell for residential dwelling.
Okay, well, commissioners, do you feel that you have enough information to make a decision about approval of the sealed bid at this point?
I do.
What if you
Yes.
just for me to just be heard as a representative of the bidder regarding access?
Sure, absolutely. Come on up. And you are Mrs. Wallace?
Yes, I submitted a letter as well. which I
Yes,
think
we
is in the
have that.
packet.
We
Great.
do. So just for the record, if you could state your name and address.
Yes, so my name is Michaela Wallace and my address. I'm with the firm Hagberg, Reuter, Gowell, Fredericks and Higgins, and our address is 650 Northeast 5th Street, McMinnville, Oregon. And I also, this might be superfluous, but I also have some additional photographs of the property, if that would be helpful to be submitted to the commissioners at this time, besides what I submitted with the letter yesterday.
I think what you submitted was comprehensive and
Okay.
insufficient.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So just to speak on access briefly, I believe the easement, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Johnston, but the easement is from 1961, recorded at volume 17, page 426.
Correct.
Okay. I just want to kind of discuss this easement and maybe make it a little clearer, and maybe the county surveyor could also comment on this, but this easement is not a actual recorded easement. This is a deed conveying a property that is not the subject property, tax lot 400 under consideration here. And this deed conveyed that property to, it looks like a Garabrandt Lumber and Investment Company, and also conveyed an easement. So the benefited property of the easement is the property that was conveyed to Garabrandt Lumber and Investment Company, which is not our tax lot. It is, there's a legal description here. It's based on the section numbers and the quarters of the section 26. And because the tax lot at issue does not benefit from this granted easement, it would not have a lawful right to utilize the easement because it is not the benefited parcel. It might be the burdened parcel, but it is not the benefited parcel. So that means it would not have a legal right to use that access because of how this easement was granted to the adjacent property. And I'm not sure if this easement is, or if this document is in the record, but I have copies if that is necessary, if the commissioners feel that's necessary, if they want a copy, or I don't know if you've seen it already.
Does that sound like what you were looking at?
Yep.
Okay.
So I don't know if anyone has any more questions about that, but that's the only thing I wanted to briefly touch on.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions?
No, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will move approval of the sealed bid in the amount of $15,250 for tax lot number R 592600400. And I just want to state that this process has been a little bit more lengthy and complicated than maybe we've done in the past. And I want to thank Mr. McKinley for your patience, because we do, with the lack of availability of land and the rarity of these things coming forward, we do have an obligation to sort of look at every aspect of it and make sure that we're maximizing the return for the county and county taxpayers. So I appreciate your patience in that process. Commissioners, any further discussion?
No, I appreciate it. It must have been a little nerve wracking to have to hear that this was not a done deal, but I do appreciate the two commissioners who've really looked into this with more diligence than we have in the past. But usually when we have a property, it's got significant impediments, and that's why we have it. So anyway, thank you.
No, I appreciate Dennis. When I actually called the Don Seats, Don called Dennis, and then Dennis, reached out to me. So I appreciate him giving me the 10-cent tour of the property and
Did you tell him you're from the government and you're here to help him?
I wore my Yamhill County coat, but I did put my John Deere beanie on, so kind of got blended a little bit, be like, it worked out good.
You're a lot younger.
Yeah. That's why I wear the hat.
Okay, there's no further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. And thank you for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, item I2 is discussion of areas of liaison for 2023, and this was continued from January 5th of last week.
And for this one, unless the board wants to have further discussion about that, but based on last discussion, I updated that and presented it to the board. So at this point, if the board's okay with the areas of liaison as presented, I'd be looking for a motion for approval. So
I move approval of the areas of liaison.
Second.
Okay, I was just checking my notes real quick. Any further discussion, objections? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. And I know there's a fair board meeting next week, so I'll forward you that because they've been sending some info. Item J, other business, is J1 is consideration of approval to add 1.0 full-time equivalent FTE HS Specialist 1 406.22 in the Health and Human Services Physician Management roster.
Chair, I would move approval of item J1.
Okay, is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. J2, consideration of approval of service element prior authorization, or SEPA number 59207-127 for $159,941 under the agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and the Department of Human Services for the financing of our Community Developmental Disabilities Program.
Chair, I move approval.
Okay, is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. J3, consideration of approval for the intent to award a contract to Civic Plus for development and hosting of a new county website. And I believe we have Shane's here in case there's any questions.
yes, and just to clarify, this was at the end of a pretty lengthy procurement process. We did an RFP. What we're asking the board for today is a notice of intent to award. And then that will enable staff to go and finalize a contract. That contract would then come back before the board for final approval as well. So this is essentially to allow us a notice of intent to award. It starts the whatever protest period and then enables us to enter into contract negotiations to finalize that.
Okay.
And again, this is long overdue. Our website is,
It sucks.
it's been replaced. Yeah. So this is going to be a big lift and another project, again, where we're trying to modernize and make information more readily available to the public and streamline our website.
I was looking at this, and Shane, all I can say is this is something that a lot of us for a long time have wanted, but I was looking at some of the whiz bang elements that are, we've got credit card processing and department header page. So in other words, it's so hard to find anything on our website currently. And if you're looking for something specific, it's very convoluted. So there was that. Also, folks can have a username and a password to go in, and just if they're going to the website occasionally, print friendly pages. Citizens can subscribe to various lists from different departments. It's, yeah. So thank you for all the work. Everybody's done
improvement,
on
yeah.
this. It's huge.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we are recommending Civic Plus is their focus on citizen engagement. So that was one of the bigger factors in us making this recommendation.
They've done a lot of websites just around our area too, McMinnville, Carlton,
Eugene.
Eugene,
Yeah.
Snohomish.
Yeah.
And I clicked on a few of them. They're pretty well laid out.
Yeah. Over 20 years of experience working with local governments, and that's their primary focus, over 12,000 websites. So they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They've got it down.
Wanna-
The other nice thing too of it is that refresh every 4 years, so you get like a Botox treatment, right? Freshen up, so it looks good, so keep you kind of current. So.
I like that.
It's a lot of work.
It
If you
is.
think about all the back end stuff that has to handle the
Mhm.
interfacing, it's a
absolutely.
ton of work.
And they really cater to government and local government. That was
Yeah.
another real upside for Civic Plus too. So, because needs change over time.
Mhm.
And so they're constantly looking at those needs and adding new features to address those needs.
I was
Yeah,
looking at the timeline, and it's certainly going to take a while. We're looking at what, the better part of a year.
Yeah, definitely going to take some time. Data migration is a big piece of this too,
Mhm.
looking at what we currently have and what we need to move over. That's a huge piece that we still need to address. And when we sit down and start looking at, a project plan and putting things together. So yeah, there's a lot of work ahead of us.
Mhm.
But, we'll definitely put a team together, a county team to work on it. So that'll be important. And I do want to add that there was a team that went through all the proposals. And I want to thank everybody that did submit. We really did have a lot of good proposals to choose from. And so it was a unanimous decision by the team to move forward and propose Civic Plus. So.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
There's also some regulatory issues, right? That
Yes.
these guys can take care of that
Yes. That's
streamline, make it a little bit easier.
Yes, that's one of the things too, is fostering that, government resident interactions. And so when a resident can go to the website, being able to find what they want quickly and not have to, make a phone call, but be able to, do what they need to do and get on with their day.
Yeah.
So.
All right,
Great.
thank you.
Exciting stuff.
Yep.
Looking forward to it. Okay, I will move approval of item J3. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you, Shay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item K is our public hearings. K1 is the second public hearing in the matter of initiating formation of a new rural fire protection district to provide fire and EMS services under ORS 478. McMinnville Fire District is the name of the proposed district, with boundaries being the existing McMinnville Rural Fire Protection District, plus all land within the city of McMinnville. And this is consideration of approval in the matter of an order approving the formation of the McMinnville Fire District, adopting notice of the election to refer to the voters in the special district election of May 16th of 2023, the measure for formation of the McMinnville Fire District and establishment of a permanent tax rate. This is obviously the second public hearing we've had, and we're here to take public testimony on this. And it appears that we have former Commissioner Dennis Gex joining us today. Welcome, Dennis.
Welcome.
Welcome. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Morning, Dennis.
It's a little harder.
By the way, I certainly appreciated that presentation by the young lady on the Constitution.
Yeah.
My wife and I, for many years now, have supported Hillsdale College out of Michigan, which is a college that pushes very hard to get people educated on the Constitution. And they have free courses you can take online to learn about the Constitution and all the parts. It's available to any citizen and any student. So
Nice.
sounds like she's done her homework.
Yes, she's very talented.
Okay, this is on this,
Commissioner, can you give us your name and address for the record?
oh, okay.
We know who you are,
We
but
know where you live too, but
it's okay. We know where to find you.
I will definitely try to remember it. Name is Dennis Gex. I live at 14325 Northwest Pheasant Hill Road. I'm in the McMinnville Rural Fire District. And for, I think it was about 6 years, I was a member of the board of directors on that particular district back in the early 2000s. It's probably the best hidden secret in the rural area, the rural fire district. Most people, if you even talk to them, they don't know what you're talking about. It shows up as a line item on the taxes and that's about it. Because the rural fire district doesn't have any firefighters, it doesn't have any equipment. What it has is a board whose main job is to contract with the city of McMinnville for services for rural fire protection. And that's been the case over the years. Currently, I looked at my taxes on this particular item for this year that I paid last year. The Rural Fire Protection District charges on our particular piece of property was $508.11. Not a small amount. Seems reasonable since we've been up there, and it's been over 40 years now. We've never had to call them. We're very thankful for that. But basically, it's an insurance policy for people in the rural area. A couple of years ago, we got hit on our property with $66.25 for Fire Patrol Northwest. This is the state, so they come in, and this has to do with the fact that we're now considered forest land from the standpoint of fire protection. And so there's another hit that comes in there. As I read this particular, I must admit, the information I've got is out of the News Register. I read it last night. That's why I'm here today. Is that basically those fees are going to be doubled. That $500 will move up to $1,000. Well, I imagine some people can pay that, and there's a lot of different residences out there that could be a pretty heavy hit. But the piece of information I wanted to give you on this was that the only representation that the rural community has for fire protection is through its elected board. That's a three-member board. During my time there, and when Ray Fields was chair, if any of you remember Ray, the big issue was incrementalism. McMinnville had a fire department. It had what it needed for fire protection in McMinnville, and what kind of benefit would serving the outlined area be in determining what the rate should be. And so the rate was never the same as the rate in McMinnville. It was always less. And I will admit, every time it came up, the contract came up for renewal, there was that big discussion. The McMinnville Fire Department wanted more and the rural district didn't want to give more, and they ended up with a negotiation where it's at. It's an incrementalism kind of situation. The idea of having a single fire district where the rates outside of McMinnville are doubled, I think is obscene. And because of that, you're kind of, from the standpoint of a citizen out there, our last point of protection, that some pretty heavy duty negotiating go on here to get a reasonable rate for the rural folks if this is to come together. McMinnville has a monopoly on this, in that who else do you contact with? The rural fire district could end up setting up its own fire department. When you start looking what's involved in all of that, that just doesn't make any sense. So we're dealing with monopoly here. At the same time, from the rural side of this particular thing, we add a benefit with the total amount of tax money that's coming in for a system that's basically intact and doesn't have to be enlarged a great amount to take care of the rural side. One of the things that we did, I know Ray was really proud of this, we got rural protection equipment through federal grants that we could apply for that became available for the McMinnville Fire Department at that particular point. But when I look at this, I see the rural rates doubling. What I'm asking you to don't put it on the ballot. That's my input.
Dennis, have you heard any feedback from rural residents about EMS service particularly? Because when Newburgh had that discussion, there was a lot of concern in the Newburgh rural district that EMS service was sorely lacking and the response times were it took a long time to get somebody to your house. And that was kind of the sticking point for them. It wasn't necessarily that we have these big conflagrations anymore. It's that, it's the heart attack or somebody falls or something. And that was the concern. Have you been hearing a lot of that from neighbors and folks in the rural district?
Mainly it's our own experience with that. We pay, I think it's around $140, $150 a year for service. So that if we need to have someone come out from the EMS, they'll come out, they'll pick us up. I've had to use it twice. My wife hasn't had to use it. But we pay extra for that.
Outside of like a private service?
As a resident out there,
Okay.
if they will come, but if they come, there will be a charge.